On October 7th, Israel experienced the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. This is not a time for any of us to stay silent, and despite what some Democrats and the squad believe, it is not the time for Israel to back down. That is exactly why last week I led 19 colleagues in calling for President Biden to freeze the $6 billion ransom payment he gave Iran. We know that Iran bankrolls Hamas, and yet it is perplexing why this administration refuses to issue a formal decision to freeze the $6 billion. We need to ensure that not another dollar goes to Iran, even when the media attention on this issue with Israel dissipates. Unfortunately, we're also learning that President Biden's trip to Israel tomorrow was intentionally not announced until Secretary Blinken received assurances from Netanyahu on a humanitarian aid package for Palestine. The U.S. should not be placing conditions on our support for Israel because of demands made by the squad. The administration knew that sending U.S. taxpayer dollars to the Palestinians could bolster Hamas. Yet President Biden has sent them over $730 million in aid since taking office via the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees. And yesterday, we learned Hamas stole aid from that group. I'll be introducing legislation to halt all funding for them until Iran is expelled from the UN and investigated for violations. Americans should also be concerned about our own vulnerabilities resulting from President Biden's open border policies. As long as Biden allows our border to be open, an attack on our own soil isn't a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Protecting our homeland and preventing Hamas sympathizers from entering our country is paramount, and the egregious actions of Hamas must not go unpunished. 30 American citizens are dead. Women were raped, paraded through the streets, and murdered. Innocent babies were beheaded. We must permanently freeze the $6 billion ransom payment to Iran. We must halt taxpayer dollars going to the Palestinians, and we must secure our own southern border, and we must stand with Israel. At this time, let's see, Senator Marshall, Senator Thune.
Thank you, Marcia. Thanks for your leadership on this. Our hearts break for our friends and allies in Israel. And an important part of standing up with Israel is standing up to Iran. And what I find most sort of reprehensible about the Biden orchestrated deal with Iran to free up the $6.6 billion, dollars that they can use. We all know money is fungible for their malign activities. They are the #1 sponsor of terrorism in the world today. Is that happened at all times, of all times, on September the 11th. But I appreciate Senator Blackburn and her good work, and our colleagues. The administration is at least backing away from that ill-advised move, and I think we need to make that, codify that, put that into law. So there will be an attempt to do that, to get unanimous consent to permanently freeze that $6.6 billion that was going to be made available to Iran. And I hope that our colleagues on both sides of the aisle will step up and do the right thing and send a clear and unequivocal message, not only of support for Israel, but that we as a nation will stand up to the world's largest state sponsor of terror, and that is Iran. So thank you, Marcia, for your leadership.
Absolutely, James.
6 weeks ago, I was in Jerusalem meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's probably the last senator to have met with the Prime Minister prior to the attacks of October 7th from Hamas. While I was on that visit, I went up to the border with Lebanon to see the Hezbollah terror tunnels. Many of us saw the Hamas terror tunnels in Gaza over the years, but the Hezbollah terror tunnels were dug over the course of several years. Inside those tunnels, spray painted "On Our Way to Jerusalem." They've been planning an attack for many, many years. The Israelis discovered them and stopped it. But when I met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the most important topic we discussed, the first topic we discussed, was Iran. It was Iran's backing of Hamas and of Hezbollah. And you can't make this up. Shortly after I returned to see President Biden releasing $6 billion to the Iranians. It's unconscionable the United States could be used in a war against our most important ally, and that's Israel. Let's not forget in 1979, when Iran fell during the revolution, the first Ayatollah came out and identified the United States as the great Satan and Israel as the little Satan. That wasn't just discussed back in 1979. Just do a search and see the most recent posts. You will see the United States called out today by the Iranians as the great Satan and Israel as the little Satan. We need to stand with Israel, stop appeasing Iran. This is a moment of moral clarity that is badly needed by our country. We need this from President Biden to understand clearly who the true friends are and who the enemies are. And Biden's ransom payment made to the Iranians shows you where his true colors are, and that's facilitating and enabling Iran to continue to be the leading sponsor of terrorism in the world.
Morning. John.
Ronald Reagan famously talked about peace through strength. Weakness is a provocation. It's an incentive for the #1 state sponsor of terrorism, Iran, and other autocratic countries like Russia in Ukraine, like China in Asia, to take action when they feel like America and its allies have let its guard down. And unfortunately, the message of the Biden administration has been one of appeasement of Iran. Looking back over the course of history, Iranians have American blood on their hands, dating back from at least 1979 during the Iranian Revolution, and more recently in Iraq, where they were the provider of explosively formed penetrators, which would penetrate the steel of our Humvees and other armored vehicles and kill American soldiers. That's been well documented. And more recently, as you've heard, they are the #1 state sponsor of terrorism, providing $100 million a year in assistance to Hamas and Hezbollah. They're proxies. So it is absolutely critical, having the deterrence having failed because of the Biden administration's willingness to make a deal with Iran on the nuclear issue and pay any price to release essentially Iranian oil sales around the world, is defying the sanctions that have been put in place. The Trump administration had a policy of maximum pressure on Iran, which is what they understand. But they also understand weakness, as do our other friends, our other enemies around the world. President Putin is celebrating this attack of Hamas against Israel. So is President Xi. But they are watching to see what our response will be, and it must be clear and unequivocal. We stand with Israel and our allies.
Thank you, Marshall. Marshall, thank you for doing this. So I just got off the phone about an hour ago to the Israeli ambassador. He wanted to stress to me, and I think all of us, they're very worried about what Iran will do next. So the idea you can bribe Iran to be normal doesn't work. There's not enough money you can send these people to make them behave. They have an agenda to destroy the Jewish state, to purify Islam, and come after us. I believe them when they say death to America. They're not joking. So isolate Iran, weaken Iran, destroy Hamas is the objective, right? Why now? Why so vicious? The Israeli ambassador told me, and I agree, they believe this attack was directed by Iran using Hamas to stop the effort to normalize between Saudi Arabia and Israel. The biggest nightmare for the Ayatollah is for the Arab world to march toward the light, work with Israel to have a better life for everybody in the region. That's why they did this. They're trying to destroy the normalization of Saudi Arabia and Israel. They're trying to get Israel in on the ground, be vicious. These are religious Nazis. Not only should we cut off all the money, we should put on the table that if there's a second front open against Israel by Hezbollah that has 100,000 precision-guided rockets pointed at Israel, if that happens, there will not be a two-front war, there will be a three-front war. There's either going to be one front or three fronts. I'm begging the Biden administration to be clear. Just don't say don't. Spell out what happens if Hezbollah is used by Iran to try to expand this war and destroy Israel. I appreciate the aircraft carriers, strike groups going into the region. We have the capability, but we need to have the will. And I believe the people behind me would rise to the occasion, and I hope there are people on the other side would rise to the occasion if this war escalates and if Hezbollah opens up another front in a serious way to destroy and overwhelm the Israeli Iron Dome defenses, that we would be going after the great Satan. The great Satan is not the United States or Israel, it's Iran.
Thank you, Marcia, for doing this. We have a lot of people in Florida that were over in Israel on holiday. They've got a lot of relatives and friends there. I have one individual I talked to that his sister-in-law's family, 3 kids, I think 2 6-year-olds, 3, and the parents are all just murdered, shot in the head. I talked to an individual at a kibbutz that I visited with my wife in 2019. She fortunately was out of town, but the people on her left, everybody, every house on her street, everybody was murdered. The babies were beheaded. Teenage girls were raped and then burned alive. So that's what we're dealing with. So this is not just Hamas. This is Iran. What are we doing? What is the Biden administration thinking? That how can you ever do something with somebody that wants to destroy you and destroy your friends? So we have to make sure this money does not go to Iran. But I'm in the camp with Lindsay. We have got to send a message to Iran. This has to stop. Unless if it doesn't stop, you will be attacked. I mean, this is the only way this is going to end. And their goal is to destroy Israel, destroy every Jew, and destroy every American. We have 30 Americans died. We've got Americans held hostage. This administration needs to show up and start worrying about the people, spend more time worrying about Americans and Israel than it does about having some relationship with Iran and the Palestinians. It's disgusting what this administration is doing.
Well, look, the White House has to make a choice. You cannot be pro-Israel and pro-Iran. You have to make that decision. There's no way that you can support both of these people. I have a hunch that the moment the Biden administration unfroze the $6 billion was the sentinel moment when the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard told Hamas, let's go forward with this plan that we've had going on here. Joe Biden is the most pro-Iranian president we've ever had. Think about it. It goes way beyond this $6 billion we're talking about. Under this administration, the Iranian reserves have went from $6 billion to $60 billion. So they have $60 billion in reserve. Well, how come? Well, since the moment Joe Biden got in office, he turned his head to the sanctions that we've had. The Iranian Ghost Armada has grown from 60 ships to 300 ships taking Iranian or Russian oil and selling that to China, now to the tune of $1 billion a week. So Joe Biden is allowing Iran to make $1 billion a week now to fund terrorism. Let's think about Joe Biden's relationship with Iran for just a second here. From even the time he's campaigning, he all but guaranteed that Iran would be able to develop nuclear weapons. And for all practical purposes, they have them. They've enriched uranium up to 60%. They can put that uranium in series and quickly have an atomic bomb. Think about the consequences of that. So Iran not only funds the terrorists, they feed the terrorists, they arm the terrorists, they plan the terrorist attacks, just like they plan this attack as well. They coordinate all these terrorist attacks. Joe Biden is in bed with Iran for all practical purposes. He empowers them. So he says he's pro-Israel, but his actions say he's pro-Iran, and you have to choose one or the other. The White House is yet to come out with a clear vision, but let me tell you what I think that the vision should be. First and foremost, our number one priority should be able to get American hostages and American citizens back home safely. Next, Lindsay, he needs to tell Iran exactly what the plan is going forward here. They need to know very clearly what the consequences are. We need maximum sanctions on them. They need to know if there's any hint of them developing nuclear warheads that we will end that up front and very, very quickly. So we need to disembowel our relationship with Iran and condemn them. Why won't this White House step up and condemn Iran yet? Have we heard anything yet from this White House condemning what Iran has done? And then finally this is the 30th point we need to make. Let's talk about Hamas just for a second. In the same sense that the United States cannot tolerate nuclear warheads in Cuba, Israel cannot live with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn, for putting this together, and also thank you for your leadership. Immediately upon the atrocities that we saw, you sprang into action. And she led a letter to the president with many of us saying we must refreeze the $6 billion headed to Iran. When we see what's happening in Israel, y'all, it is pure evil. You can't look at it as a parent, as an American, just as a person and not be able to say that. It's not only disheartening, it's not only gut-wrenching, it is without a doubt evil. And I believe as Americans, we must look evil in the eye and take it down. We must stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel as they eradicate Hamas terrorists. These terrorists don't care. They don't care how many men they kill, how many women they rape, how many children they kidnap. If you haven't watched the video of the children, the toddlers, the babies being held by terrorists, them using them as human shields, go watch it. If you haven't listened to the reporters tell about walking in to the place where these atrocities happened, them giving their recount of what they saw, what it felt like, go watch it. We cannot turn a blind eye to evil. We must stand firm with Israel. And I am hopeful that the Biden administration will do much more than just refreezing the $6 billion that is headed to Iran. We know what to do. We've got to squeeze out any type of financial resources they're getting through that, through also working with our G7 colleagues to make sure that we return to a posture of maximum pressure, bone-crushing sanctions, drying up each and every dollar that is headed to their hands. We know that Iran is the world's largest state sponsor of terrorists. We know that. We know they have told us that their goal is to wipe Israel off the face of this earth. We need our leaders to stand firm in calling them accountable, and then knowing that Hamas not only wants to wipe out Israel, but has said that they want to wipe out the Jewish people. To all of the people here in America, to those suffering and hurting in Israel, we want you to know we stand with you. And we stand ready to do everything possible to not only hold these key people accountable, but ensure your safety and prosperity moving forward. Thank you.
I thank my colleagues. I thank Senator Blackburn for getting us together on this, this critical issue. Look, the level of barbarism that we've seen here, it is nothing short of evil. Over 1,400 children, women, men, brutally murdered, 30 Americans killed, dozens missing or presumed hostage. My office is working on dozens of cases of extraction or getting these hostages home. Hamas terrorists would not have been able to execute such a heinous series of attacks without support from Iran. We know that. That's why President Biden's $6 billion giveaway to the regime was absolutely so dangerous. That gave rise to the very issue that we've been dealing with these last 10 days. Now, it was a ransom payment to the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. And sadly, the irony is that give back was announced on September 11th. That just showed more Biden weakness when what we need around the world is more American strength. We should be standing shoulder to shoulder with the state of Israel, and we should give them everything that they need to destroy Hamas.
We stand with Israel, and we must end this appeasement strategy by the Biden administration toward Iran. I'm glad the president finally saw some common sense in temporarily freezing the $6 billion. But let's remember, this was a deal cut in secret by the Biden administration. And if the Wall Street Journal reports are accurate, Iran was double dealing with us, talking to Hamas, planning this attack at the same time they're negotiating getting the $6 billion from us. That just shows you the level of contempt that Iran has for the Biden administration. It is naive and stupid to think that if we give them enough money that Iran will play nice. It's not going to happen. This $6 billion is part of an overall package of $50 billion in sanction relief that the administration, the Biden administration, has given back to Iran. This must end. These brutal attacks on our closest ally in the Middle East demonstrate that this must end. We must stop this foolishness of thinking that we can bring Iran around. We must make sure that this stops. And remember, what the Biden administration said is, oh, look, this $6 billion, this is for humanitarian aid. It's for food. How dumb do they think we are? Right? If you have $60 you're going to spend on groceries, and I give you $60, say, hey, go spend this on groceries, you can go spend that $60 on anything you want. Money can be spent anywhere. And in fact, the Iranians, Ayatollah Khamenei, have said they're going to spend the money any way they want. And as already been noted here, they're the largest sponsor of state terrorism, the largest state sponsor of terrorism. It is crazy to give them money so they can support Hamas. And whether or not they actually planned this attack with Hamas or not, they have been supporting Hamas, and they are responsible for this attack. And so I join my colleagues in saying that this must end. We must stop supporting Iran, and we must send a very strong message that we stand with Israel. I want us to thank Senator Blackburn for her efforts to be able to make this happen. I'm also on board with some of the other bills, like by Senator Scott and Senator Cotton, to stop this as well. But let me tell you, temporarily freezing $6 billion when we have seen the atrocities in Israel does not cut it. All of this money needs to be stopped and stopped permanently. And that's why I appreciate the effort of Senator Blackburn and my colleagues to make sure that happens. We must end this appeasement strategy toward Iran. We must stand with Israel. Thank you.
Questions?
Yes,
Go
Senator,
ahead.
I have a question about recognizing Senator Graham said that he's concerned about a third spot of Hezbollah potentially. If that were true and the U.S. found itself involved, wouldn't this be a time to press Senator Tuberville to lift his holds on all of the senior military officials? Aren't those related to national security?
The Democrats, no, they could call those up one at a time and do them. They could have been doing them for months. What we need to do right now is make certain that Israel knows we stand with them. Yes, go ahead.
Iran's defense minister has threatened a preemptive strike for this ground invasion by Israel. How serious do you think that the U.S. Biden administration should take those threats when considering supporting Israel? And what specifically do you think the Biden administration should do should
John,
Iran get involved?
do that.
Should come again on, you're asking if Iran.
Yeah, the defense minister has threatened preemptive strike. They threatened that Hezbollah will get involved again in this northern front of the war. What do you think the Biden administration should do? Should that happen? And how seriously do you think it should take it?
Well, I think you have to confront the evils of Iran and Hamas, and remember, Iran is enabling Hamas and Hezbollah with strength, and they have to understand that there will be consequences to this kind of behavior. And I think the United States, obviously, as they think about, and you heard earlier Senator Graham and others talk about having a clear plan, but if they were to try and escalate or in some way further what's already been done, then I think they have to understand there will be a response that needs to be a swift one, and it shouldn't be just the United States. It should be all of our allies, not only in the region but around the world.
But that means U.S. military involvement?
Well, I think I think you have to. I don't think you take any option off the table. I think you have to be prepared to respond to what is a clear provocation and not only terrible loss of life for Israel, but also, as has already been pointed out, it doesn't stop at Israel. I mean, Iran, we are the next target, and I think people need to understand this has national security implications, not just for Israel in that region, but for the United States.
Over here.
You talked about the destabilizing policies of the Islamic Republic in the region and their support for terrorism. Over a year ago, after a woman was killed in Iran by the morality police, the people of Iran took it to the streets and they called for regime change in Iran. And lots of people have been killed since then. More than 20,000 people have been put in jail. What they've witnessed so far is a Biden administration that turned its back on them, an Iran envoy who started downgrading the calls for regime change to reform, and Congress showed some sympathy. Do you think now that the Islamic Republic is attacking U.S. allies in Congress, there will be more support for Iranian people's aspirations and their call for a regime change?
We have continued to talk with individuals in Tennessee that are of Iranian descent and hear from them about how young people in Iran want to see a regime change and want to see that freedom. I think when you look at the brutality of this attack on Israel, people recognize that Hamas has been designated since '97 as a terrorist organization in the United States. They understand that they're a proxy of Iran, and now they realize that Iran is the globe's largest sponsor of terrorism, and they're wanting to see something done. Yes?
I just wanted to clarify, earlier the conversation about striking Iran. Do you guys agree with Senator Graham that the United States should directly
Lindsay,
strike
you
Iran
wanna-
if Hezbollah does get involved in Israel? And what is that red line? Because there's already rocket fire going back and forth between Hezbollah and Israel.
Well, I mean, I think Senator Graham speaks his own mind on these issues, and there isn't anybody who's a greater ally and friend of Israel than Senator Graham. I think that as you think through, the administration, I think, clearly needs to have a plan, think through the progression of various things that could or couldn't happen. I think that I will let Senator Graham speak for himself on that subject, but I just think we have to be prepared, and our allies have to be prepared, in the event the Iranians try to escalate this, and hopefully they'll think better of it. I think there's a lot of chest pounding that's going on right now, which, in the end, if they think long and hard about it, the consequences for them for if they try to orchestrate, rocket attacks from the north, from Hezbollah, or other types of Syria. I just think they have to be prepared for what inevitably will be a response, and that response could be very consequential for them. And I don't know what form it takes, but I just think our military has to be prepared for that, and understand that this is part of a broad effort. I mean, Iran's furnishing drones in Ukraine. This is malign activity. Doesn't stop at the border of Gaza. This is a nation which clearly has in its sights not only Israel, but the United States.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Thanks.